Merry meet, Annie here. This video is in response to a question from a viewer. I have so many wonderful topics lined up that you have all provided. Thank you so much. This question was, what do you think of those of us who do not use God, Spirit, or deities? I thought it was a pretty interesting topic. Well, it took me into some directions that may not have even been what the viewer had in mind when they made that comment. But I'm going to take you where I went with this, and I also think somewhere in that I'm going to address what our viewer was thinking about as a topic. I mentioned in a previous video that I have the habit now of journaling, of writing about a topic. It takes me farther and deeper into the topic, gives me things to consider and ponder. Sometimes new things to consider and ponder. Thank you to my viewers for that. And then I'm bringing that to YouTube. So when I have some of these more in-depth videos like this one, you might see me looking down. Yep, I might be reading in part, but I am reading my words. And just in case you like the words, a more detailed version of this YouTube video, the words that were originally behind it that covered a little bit more, is available on my Patreon account. That's listed in the text box below as part of the public offerings there. Mind you, this is not part of what you pay for on that Patreon. I'm uploading my YouTube videos and their associated blogs on that Patreon account. So here's where my ponderings took me when it came to this topic of God's spirits and deities, and whether they are or are not present in any of our practices. The question took me back to my earliest circle. That was my starting place for this. There were deities that were given in that circle. There kind of always are. We were expected to align to them. They were the heart of our circle. For me, those gods made themselves known to me almost immediately. I don't know if they knew I desperately needed them, but when I called out, they were there. They were speaking to me in words I could literally hear. And in time, I even felt their energy and saw their form. That's how instantaneous it was for me. But it wasn't so for my working partner. He and I were bonded in so many ways. We were like twins when it came to most of our learning and working together. It was that way for all the years I knew him before he left this world. Somewhere in my older videos, I did one about him. Don't go and look it up unless you feel like crying. The video is called This One's for Tyrone. Tyrone and I were well into our year of training. Before initiation, that intense period of preparation. One dark moon night, Tyrone told me something. It was something that tore him apart. It literally was breaking his heart. He told me that he had no sense of the gods in our coven. The elements had come easy to him, and in fact, I knew that because he was the kind of person, when he was working with the elements, you almost tangibly saw them swirling around him. He was an amazing witch when it came to working with the elements, and only got more and more powerful in that regard as he matured. I was rather shocked when he told me that the gods themselves just simply didn't exist to him. Oh, he honored the wisdom of their stories. He enjoyed studying about all cultures and all deities. But they felt just like that. They felt like stories. Never more personal than that. For Tyrone, the gods were like a void. And his heart was broken because he was so desperate for contact with them. Well, we talked long into that night debating how or if we should bring this to our priest. Our teacher was very old school and strict and very unemotional. And he tended in his style to lecture, and he didn't leave room for questions. He didn't just tell you what to do, he often told you what to believe. So Tyrone is dealing in his head with, how do I tell this man that I'm not there? I simply am not feeling what he says I'm supposed to be feeling. The next time we were with our priest for learning time, Tyrone was brave enough to bring this up. After he said what he had to say, and I remember he sat there all slumped forward, looking down, not making eye contact with me or our priest. We waited for our priest to say something. I know we were both equally terrified. Would our priest chide him for maybe not working hard enough? I think that was one of Tyrone's greatest fears. Or would he simply say, get up, leave, I don't want to see you again? We sat there trembling, while our priest just looked down at the floor with a frown on his face. I swear it felt like forever before, in a moment of openness, probably one of the few genuine human moments we ever experienced with that man, our priest comforted Tyrone with the fact that the gods would choose when and where to make themselves known to him. That he would not, in our circle or in any gathering, be the only person who was at that moment experiencing the gods as archetype and wisdom and not intangible form. And that whether we individually were seeing into the eyes of our gods or experiencing them in the power of what was said about them, we were all connected to the great human collective consciousness that seeks wisdom and becomes wisdom. I share Tyrone's story because I've often been in circles where there was a varying degree of intimacy with the gods. I've even struggled with that recently in a circle of loved ones who honored Lou. Lou has chosen not to make himself known to me. Oh, I want to meet him, but he simply won't even meet me halfway. Even within the space of our circle, he simply wasn't present for me. It left me eager to learn everything about his mythology and his story. Who knows? Maybe someday he'll decide she knows enough now that I will deign to make myself known to her. But I'd have to say that our priest was right in that rare moment of compassionate teaching when he said that it would be to each of us what it needed to be for us in the moment. And that the most terrible thing we could do was pretend to believe in something that had not yet revealed itself to us. In the ways of the witch, we know what we experience. Those experiences cannot be faked. They must be genuine and intimate. I think every powerful witch walks a line which balances personal gnosis and healthy skepticism. I think, well, Tyrone was so upset. He was actually leaps and bounds ahead of me in that he was so present to his experience and he dared to be skeptical. What about practitioners with, as my viewer put it, no relation to God, spirit, or deity? I wanted to share that about Tyrone because, well, that came to me thinking about absence of God, spirit, or deity. I got to tell you that in time, the gods not only became present to Tyrone, but powerfully present. To my mind, powerful magics can be done outside of relationship to deity. The energy we tap into can as well be what rises from the earth that is our home, the land we live on. It can be energy we tap into at the etheric level, perhaps the very essence of collective wisdom, which Tyrone could sense, but he just didn't have a name or form to put against it. Some of us work strictly through ancestors or others who have gone before. Some of us tap into a universal energy which we personally have no need to define in specifics. Some work with energy I can only describe as personal. I do know when I see it in action, it's something that comes from within, truly born from the practitioner's own energy. Some employ ecstatic techniques that lead them to an altered state of consciousness, and that's where they complete their workings. Let's think about magic for a moment. What do you think of as a definition to the word magic? I know when I was first taught Crowley's quote, and I bet a lot of you also could probably recite that as a definition of magic: the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. I was taught that the most important word in that phrase was will. And will was capitalized. Crowley did capitalize it. It represented one's true will. More about true will in a minute. But first, another consideration of will that most of us know well. The reed. And ye harm none, do as ye will. Yeah, I learned it with this slightly antiquated phrasing. And when I learned it, will was once again capitalized to indicate its deeper meaning as aligned to true will. It makes the read a lot more complicated than it might seem on the surface, because we always have to consider will with a capital W, what's best for us, and what's best for our highest self. It makes the read, well, a lot less selfish than it can look on the surface. True will is an interesting consideration. Crowley gives a simple explanation of true will in his book of the Law. He defines true will as either a person's grand destiny in life or as a moment-to-moment path of action that operates in perfect harmony with nature. Notice this has nothing to do with specific deity or human relationships with them. Even perhaps the only dogmatic guideline we kinda sorta have as Wiccans, the reed, does not require us to align to the gods. It puts the responsibility of our magics strictly and purely on us, and that's a lot of responsibility, and just as it should be. As a Wiccan, I studied and grew my practice both personally and in community around the reed. Will to me is the active energy of fire which aligns me to my gods and to my aspiration to live a life which honors them. But as a witch, I also have a relationship with the concept that is, well, more pragmatic. Margot Adler captures it just as I would have if I had her words in Drawing Down the Moon. She wrote, "Magic is a convenient word for a whole collection of techniques, all of which involve the mind. In this case, we might conceive of these techniques as including the mobilization of confidence, will, and emotion brought about by the recognition of necessity, the use of imaginative faculties, particularly the ability to visualize, in order to begin to understand how other beings function in nature so we can use this knowledge to achieve necessary ends." Whether we work our magics aligned to a higher power or we work them, as Margot writes, through a collection of techniques that may or may not involve deity, I have a feeling there are similarities in what we witches do. We have in common that we are the power to make manifest, and we have each figured out what that means for us. We may also have in common our understanding of the responsibility we hold in that regard. And possibly, we have a sense that what we do is aligned to our life's journey, and perhaps its purpose. My life experiences have confirmed that deity-centric and non-deity-centric practitioners can work together harmoniously. My life experiences have confirmed that the great work accomplished at the communal level does not require we are of identical mind and belief, but rather it requires that we be focused on the same goal. In fact, we each learn and grow more exponentially when we experience the energy of practitioners who don't mirror our practice. We might ask each other, for instance, how and why do you determine and work your magics? And what principles guide you? And in that asking, we might even ask that same question of ourselves. For my viewer who posed the initial question, those who do not use God, spirit, or deities may in ways seem different from those like me, maybe drastically different from those whose relationship is to mystery, which we decide to name God, goddess, spirit, or deity. The interesting thing, though, is to explore and find the places where our practices do connect and overlap. Consideration of each other's ways and the whys of them expands possibility for us all. Together we can be, in Crowley's words, operating in perfect harmony with nature, which to my way of thinking is the nature of the greater world and also our pure personal nature. My question for you, which I hope will intrigue you, if you are a magical practitioner, what do you assume that you have in common with fellow practitioners? I probably would have made some assumptions when I was young in my own practice that if you weren't just like me, we probably didn't have much in common. But the older I get, the more I find that magical practitioners as a whole are tapping into something that's so primal and so beautifully and perfectly human that while we arrive at it by different ways, we seem to be touching on something that's very similar. And to the viewer who asked this question, my experience, having been around a lot of practitioners who are ceremonial magicians who may or may not include deity in their practice, we seem to be aligned in more ways than not. For your consideration, for your response, maybe for a video, if you're a magical practitioner, what do you assume you have in common with fellow practitioners? A reminder that the link to my Patreon page is in the text box in case you'd like to see the entire blog that preceded the creation of this video. And that part of my Patreon is open, public, and free to all. I wish you all mirth and reverence, merry part,